Hey guys, we're going to pick back up with the muscular system of crocodiles and birds. Um, so the jaws of alligators and crocodiles are hinged at the bottom. The top jaw is really just an extension of the skull, which we mentioned when we talked about the skeletal system. Muscles responsible for closing, or actually for opening the jaws, are relatively small. You can actually hold the mouth of an alligator shut with a strong rubber band, but the periogonal muscles in the jaw, which are responsible for closing the jaw, have tremendous force. Other similar muscles throughout the alligator's body are differentiated in bundles and serve for really some pretty quick speed with those guys, with the muscles in the appendages, and force within the tail as well. So birds also have well-developed muscle bundles, and they're a good vertebrate to go a little deeper into comparing red muscles and white muscles. So I wanted to break that down for you guys. Red muscles are also known as long distance muscles. They're smaller in diameter, have a richer blood supply, contain more nuclei and mitochondria than white muscles. Myoglobin in the muscles has a higher affinity for oxygen than the blood hemoglobin, and so it allows the muscles to draw in oxygen. And we can think of red muscles as supporting aerobic respiration and allowing for sustained muscle activity. We see a higher proportion of this red muscle, also known as dark meat, in some of our long distance migratory birds. White muscles, in contrast, have less blood supply, are comprised of fibers with larger diameter. They are designed for short, powerful bursts of intense activity. They actually can allow for greater force. And you can think of these muscles as being powered by anaerobic respiration with a little less dependence on constant oxygen supply. The largest and most powerful muscle in flighted birds are extrinsic muscles that act on the wings. The pectoral muscles are attached, as we already said, to the keeled sternum and also to the furcula. And they are really the most massive pair of muscles found in any tetrapod. And they account for a large percentage of the bird's body mass. There are additional special muscles found in the legs and feet of birds, such as raptors, passerines, and aquatic species that aid in their ecological role. Cardiovascular system of crocodiles. Crocodiles possess the first complete four-chambered heart. Ventricles are totally separated from each other. The right atrium opens into the right ventricle. The left atrium opens into the left ventricle. An interesting aspect of crocodilian respiratory system is they can actually shunt blood that's come back from the body for another circuit through the body while they're underwater, rather than sending it to the lungs, allowing the body to pull out additional oxygen left in the blood. Another incredible aspect of crocodilian blood is the antibacterial, antimicrobial aspect of the blood. So there's ongoing research that shows alligator blood really cripples lots of human pathogens, including E. coli, herpes virus, yeast, and HIV. Bird circulatory system. So birds have two atria and two ventricles that are completely separated. The sinus venosus is reduced, largely incorporated into the wall of the right atrium. Deoxygenated blood flows into the right atrium through the sinus venous, then flows into the right ventricle and is pumped into the lungs via the pulmonary trunk. Oxygenated blood returns to the left atrium via the pulmonary veins and then passes to the left ventricle, which pumps the blood through the right aortic arch and throughout the rest of the body. The book mentions something again with birds worth noting, which is heat exchange that can occur that allows these homeotherms to maintain their core constant body temperature. So birds that stand in cold water or swim in cold water often have a countercurrent heat exchange mechanism in their legs that allows those scaled naked legs really just to conserve heat in the core by passing heat and maximizing along a gradient to maximize that exchange so that warm blood entering the feet passes that warmth to cooler blood exiting the feet. Respiratory system in both of these animals is really interesting. The nostrils in crocodiles are located at the tip of the snout and are closed during diving. Due to the presence of their complete secondary palate, the internal nares are located at the rear of the oral cavity. Paired lungs are located in separate pleural cavities. The lungs themselves are composed of many chambers and subchambers, which terminate at the site of gas exchange, the alveoli. This figure shows a little about the interesting mechanism for respiration in crocodiles and amphibians. So the back and forth movement of the liver in crocodiles actually acts as a piston on the lungs to help in expelling residual air. So inhalation occurs when the rib cage expands and the liver is pulled back. Exhalation takes place when the rib cage relaxes and the liver compresses against the lungs and allows air to be expelled. Crocodiles are also some of the most vocal reptiles out there, and adaptations of the respiratory system allow for those vocalizations. So we know that adult crocodiles bellow during the mating season. Young crocodiles make a whole suite of sounds to help elicit parent behavior, distress calls and warning calls. So bird respiratory system is wholly unique in all vertebrates. An internal system of air sacs is present in these guys. So air flows through the trachea and it flows through the larynx. The larynx, however, in birds is not a sound producing organ. It serves really just to control tones that originate in what has become the sound voice box for birds, which is the syrinx. It's a specialized voice box that's unique to birds, and it can create just an incredible suite of sounds. We even have some birds that have a split syrinx, a group of thrushes, which makes it sound like two different birds are singing and harmonizing with themselves. We'll talk a little bit more about the importance of vocalization in birds later. But I want to talk through air sacs and how they function in respiration. So birds' lungs are highly modified with 7 to 12 air sacs that invade all sorts of spaces in the body. Air sacs are thin-walled, distendable sacs. They're derived from the primary and secondary bronchi. They live between layers of the pectoral muscle, within the body cavity, even in the marrow cavity of some bones. They can take up as much as 80% of the entire body cavity. So functionally, we think of air sacs in two groups, as posterior air sacs and as anterior air sacs. The lungs in birds are only about half of the size of those found in mammals. So another weight saving mechanism that air sacs are allowing for. Air sacs are actually allow for 3 times the volume of air over the mammalian lungs. So air sacs use a bellows action to provide a continuous unidirectional flow of air through the bird's lungs. This means that air in the lungs is constantly and continuously being replaced. And this is different from other vertebrates who always have residual unexpired air in our lungs. Far more efficient system. So I want to talk through one breath of air and follow that through the bird's respiratory system. So when the bird, and one inhalation, oxygenated air flows through the trachea into the posterior air sacs. In a exhalation, that same air moves from the posterior air sacs into the lungs from behind. Second inhalation, that air moves from the lungs towards the anterior air sacs, at which point it's deoxygenated air containing CO2. And then it is in that second exhalation that the air that is in the anterior air sacs moves out of the body and is expelled. So 2 rounds of breath for any one breath to move through the bird's system. All right, digestive system. Crocodiles possess teeth rooted in sockets and really confined to the jaws. These teeth are replaced continuously during the animal's lifetime. Crocodile's stomach is similar to the stomach of birds, with a posterior portion that's modified as a muscular gizzard. It's a compartment that helps with mechanical digestion of food. Crocodiles and birds swallow small stones that are stored in the gizzard and help with that breakdown of food before it enters the stomach. A pancreas is present that secretes enzymes that facilitate in digestion. And then, of course, the cloaca is still present that leads to a vent. Birds' digestive system. So all living birds lack teeth. There is a sort of horny egg tooth that's developed in young birds that's temporary, allows them to help in cracking the eggshell and aids in hatching. That disappears soon after hatching. The tongue of birds is non-muscular, comes in many shapes and sizes. Most birds' tongues are short, narrow, triangular, with a few taste buds on them. Woodpeckers, you can see in this diagram, actually have a really interesting specialized tongue that wraps around the back of the skull to allow for impressive extension of the tongue. So when it's retracted, it's wrapped around the back of the skull. When it's extended, it allows them to probe for insects into small holes or into holes that they've drilled. Saliva is present. Salivary glands are present in many birds' mouths. Some actually use saliva in their nest construction, and those saliva nests of swifts are the main ingredient in bird's nest soup. A portion of the lower esophagus in some birds is present as the crop. The crop is really there to store food, primarily in grain-eating birds. It allows birds to feed really intensely on abundant food resources over a short period of time. Sometimes they're grounded and vulnerable to predators, so it's a mechanism that allows them to efficiently gather as much food as they can at once and then to go to a safe place to digest that food. Some birds, that crop has been modified to produce milk-like substance that we call pigeon's milk. And this was the initial food fed to some nestlings. And those species that have this, the hormone prolactin stimulates cells in the crop to secrete a fatty substance that is then regurgitated into the mouths of the nestlings. Birds also have a small intestine. Most birds have a paired ceca at the junction of the small and large intestines that plays an important digestive role. It may be responsible for the absorption of glucose and certain amino acids. And the ceca and other vertebrates, more evolved vertebrates, is thought to be vestigial. So we'll talk about that when we talk about mammals. A little bit about crocodile and bird sense organs. So in birds, the olfactory portion of the brain has become somewhat reduced in size. Most birds have a poor sense of smell. The cerebral hemispheres are better developed than other reptiles, but are similar to crocodiles. Optic lobes are enlarged and well developed, and the pineal gland is present. Birds have a fascinating system of self-repair and aging neurons in the brain. During a short sensitive period after hatching, young birds of many precocial species form an attachment called imprinting. They form this on the first moving object that they see. And this was demonstrated in Konrad Lorenz's study of 1935. Birds exhibit a different strategy for resting the brain as well. Some species may just spend about 5% of their time resting the brain. Other species can rest one side of the brain at a time by shutting one eye and leaving the other open. All right, let me talk individually about some of these sense organs. So eyesight is well developed in crocodiles with social signals involving combustion, combinations of visual, olfactory, and acoustic cues being important for those species. Birds have some of the best vision of all vertebrates and are really the most visually dependent. The eye itself is asymmetrical with a flattened back instead of spherical, as we see in other vertebrates. That allows the entire image to focus on the back of the eye. The eyes of some birds are so large that they may be equal to or exceed the weight of the brain. Eye muscles don't allow for much movement of the eyeball, but that's compensated for by a long and flexible neck in a lot of birds. And birds do have flexible lenses that allows them to easily change the shape of the cornea. Some bird species can perceive ultraviolet light. They have four spectrally distinct classes of cones in the retina that can distinguish colors. So small blood-rich structure known as the pecten is anchored in the optical disc region of the birds where photosensitive cells come together. So this is birds' eyes are just highly adapted to allow for incredible vision. The book goes into a lot of detail discussing the fact that we have, in some cases, two fovea in birds of prey, binocular vision, as well as colored oil droplets in the eyes of birds that sort of act in the same way that photographic filters do, allowing birds to have incredible color vision and filter out and discern certain colors in their environment. The ears of birds, hearing acuity is good in crocodiles. Vocalizations are really important as part of their social structure. Tympanic membrane is present in crocodiles as it is in all reptiles. And a special muscle allows crocodiles to close the ear cavity when it's submerged underwater. Bird hearing is important, second only to sight. You can read more about the structure of the ear of birds in your book. hearing is extremely well developed in certain species like owls who can locate their prey in total darkness. And several birds use echolocation with their ears and even asymmetry in their ears to aid in that echolocation. Smell and taste is well developed in crocodiles and less so in birds. So birds have really the worst sense of smell of any vertebrates, that with the exception being vultures and other carrion eaters that need to be able to smell their dead prey to locate them. Taste buds are less abundant in birds and other vertebrate groups, and just generally distributed across the tongue and inside the oral cavity. The endocrine system is similar enough in birds to other vertebrates not to warrant much discussion here. I think we've already noted that certain parental behaviors are brought about by prolactin, including nest building, incubation of eggs, production of pigeon milk, protection of young. Increased levels of testosterone can initiate the spermatogenesis in males, and the development of secondary sex characteristics such as brightly colored breeding plumage. The urogenital system, the mesonephron reaches its peak in development about halfway through the embryonic life, when the metanephrons begin to function as kidneys. The avian kidney consists of lobes. In most birds, the ureter empties into the urodeum. Only ostriches possess a bladder. Birds produce a semi-solid hypertonic urine with uric acid as the main nitrogenous waste product. The urogenital anatomy of female birds is really similar to that as we see in other reptiles. The ovary of birds consist of many fluid-filled cavities, and in most birds, only the left ovary is functional. Both the ovary and the oviducts are involved in the formation of eggs, and the shell is formed in the uterus, which is also called the shell gland. A little bit about reproduction in these guys. Female alligators and crocodiles often construct a nest of vegetation. They lay hard, oval shaped eggs that are laid at the center of these nests and covered. Heat generated from decaying vegetation actually helps to incubate the eggs. Bird reproduction is thought to be brought on by increasing daylight and hormone changes that cause the development of breeding plumage, courtship behavior, and even migration in some of the species that migrate. Climate conditions can really affect breeding success in birds. A lot of birds only produce a single brood annually, but others may produce 2 or even 3 under optimal conditions. Breeding often begins the year following birth, but in some species it may be delayed 3 to 5 years. Courtship and breeding behavior, we see lots of different strategies here. Territorial songs of males, male nest building, or in the case of the bowerbirds, bower building activity, all sorts of elaborate courtship displays. As far as breeding strategies go in birds, we see all of it. There was one point we assumed that almost 90% of all birds were monogamous, but genetic research is showing that promiscuity is quite present. The book talks about EPCs, extra pair copulations, where often females sort of sneak out and mate with other males, and there's an evolutionary advantage for them to to have young from more than one male, but then also there is an advantage for them to have the committed support of one male in raising those young. So males can develop counter strategies to try to prevent their females from seeking other extra pair copulations, including guarding the females to ensure their paternity. But we also see polygamy, polygyny, polyandry in birds. And in some species, we see a helper bird present in caring for the young. There are three basic types of eggs. We see oval, elliptical, and pyriform eggs. Pyriform eggs are cone-shaped and rolled. This allows them to roll in a tight circle. So we see these almost like conical eggs in cliff nesting birds and also in beach birds, where they wouldn't want their eggs to roll away. Crocodiles lay eggs in which the embryos are enclosed in a leathery shell. All birds lay eggs with hard calcified shells. And as we said, eggs size and shape really varies drastically amongst the species. We see all sorts of nests as well in birds: ground nest, cavity nest, burrows, of course, open cup nests. These nests can be made of plant materials of all sorts, saliva, mud. There's one bird in Australia that's like crocodiles, is a mound builder and uses decaying vegetation to incubate their eggs. Some birds never build nests. So you guys got to hear me talk a little bit about the brown-headed cowbird in my first lecture, or I guess in my introduction about myself. Nest parasites, like the brown-headed cowbird, never build a nest, but deposit their eggs in one or many other species' nests. Brown-headed cowbirds are actually known to parasitize up to 30 different species. Embryonic development: American alligators hatch in about 9 to 10 weeks. They do show temperature-dependent sex determination in all species. Incubation of birds ranges from 10 to 11 days to 11 to 12 weeks in the royal albatross. And in most cases, incubation is carried out by both parents. Young crocodiles begin to make small grunting sounds while still inside the egg when they're ready to emerge, alerting the parents that they're coming. Those vocalizations are also thought to communicate to the other young in the eggs and allows for synchronous hatching of those guys. And as we said, birds use their specialized egg tooth and a hatching muscle on the back of their neck to break through their calcified eggshells. So those grunting sounds of hatching crocodiles attracts the female, who then assists the young alligators in escaping from the nest. In some cases, this means they pull their nest apart. Both male and female crocodiles may pick up newly hatched young by their mouths and carry them one at a time to water. And birds are well known for providing parental care. Male and female birds both incubate the eggs. They both feed the young. They often continue parental care even after young birds have fledged. As I mentioned, in some birds, a helper bird is present, which can be a 1-year-old from the prior season, so a relative of the offspring. So growth, we've already talked through the differences between precocial and altricial strategies at the beginning of the course. So take some time maybe to look back at those two different strategies and how they compare. Sexual maturity breeding doesn't usually occur in crocodiles it may not occur for up to 10 years. The American alligator matures in about 6 years. Most songbirds can breed the spring following hatching, but larger birds may require 3 or more years to reach maturity. And there's huge discrepancy in longevity amongst birds and how long they live, ranging from 65 years in some species of parrots to just a handful of years in songbirds. And although that longevity may differ, we do know that for most birds, there's only about a 50% chance of making it through your first year. So that first year is tough. This is a really cool video on the origin of flight in birds and research with young birds to better understand how flight may have evolved. And as always, just a handful of review questions for you to go through. All right, see ya with mammals.